In the spring of 1873, a young Norwegian woman of 17 years, named Annelise Sandalen, left the village of Ål in Hallingdal, Buskerud, for the long passage west across the Atlantic. Her parents, Knud and Liv Sandalen, had taken steerage on a sail and steam packet bound for Quebec, and from there overland by emigrant car to the new Norwegian settlements rising east of the Big Sioux River. Her father had been a slate quarryman of the old Hallingdal school, schooled in the granite bench tradition. Her mother had been the daughter of a Hauge Lutheran lay preacher of the intermission revival that had swept the western fjords in the 1840s. Annelise, whom all who knew her called Anna, carried in her sea trunk a single volume of the Norwegian Synod hymnal, a wooden butter mold of her grandmother's, and a pair of carded wool stockings she had knit herself by lamplight on the long ocean crossing. The Sandalen family settled along the high terrace of the Coteau de Prairies in what would become Hamlin County, Dakota Territory. The land they preempted lay 14 miles east of the future town of Watertown, on the rolling glacial moraine that runs north and south between the James and the Big Sioux. The grass stood waist-high in summer, cut short by buffalo wallows and by the scattered groves of bur oak and tamarack that lined the north slopes. Their first sod house went up in the autumn of 1873, and by the spring of 1874, Knud Sandalen had broken 30 acres of prairie and sown spring wheat in the black sod. Anna grew tall and quiet in the new country. She learned the prairie weather and the prairie work, hauling water from the slough in summer and cutting hay twists for fuel when the buffalo chips ran out. She was confirmed in 1874 in the small Norwegian Synod log church at Hayti, where Pastor Jørgen Nygaard read the Augsburg Confession over 12 young women in their carded wool dresses. Pastor Nygaard was a strict pietist of the Old World School, trained at the seminary in Christiania, and he held the line of Synod doctrine with the iron of his calling. He was a thin man of 52 by the autumn of 1879, with hair the color of bleached straw and eyes the color of January ice on the Coteau slough. In the summer of 1877, Anna met Olav Sølvberg, a young Norwegian carpenter and sawyer recently arrived from Hallingdal by way of the Wisconsin pinery. Olav was 28, broad-shouldered, with hands that knew tamarack, and the long-toothed crosscut saw as a fiddler knows his bow. He had taken a quarter section 3 miles north of the Sandalen claim, on the high ground above the Coteau, and he had begun clearing a stand of spruce and tamarack for his timber culture claim under the Act of 1873. Anna and Olaf were married in November 1877 by Pastor Nygaard in the small log church at Hayti, with the Sandalen family and 3 of Olav's Wisconsin sawyers standing as witnesses. They built a small frame cabin of milled pine on the south slope of Olav's quarter section, and by the autumn of 1878, their son Halvor Sølvberg was born, healthy and strong, on the morning of the 5th of October. The first cold cut of winter came hard in 1878. Olav cut tamarack and spruce all that winter, working from before sunrise to past dusk, sending milled lumber by ox team down to the railhead at Watertown. Anna kept the cabin and the milking goat, named Solveig, and she nursed Halvor and watched the sky over the Coteau for the storm signs her mother had taught her to read. They were a quiet household, devout in the Synod way, attending the Hayti log church each Sunday in the spring wagon. They tithed grain and timber to the parish, and Anna joined the Dugnad work ring of Synod women, who took turns at one another's harvests, butcherings, and barn raisings in the old Norwegian way of mutual labor. In the spring of 1879, on the afternoon of the 14th of May, Olav was felling a tall spruce on the north slope of his timber claim when the trunk twisted in its hinge and pinned him beneath a heavy lower limb. He passed before sunset, with Anna kneeling in the wet leaf litter beside him, having been called from the cabin by his foreman. He was 31 years old. Pastor Nygaard read the Norwegian Synod burial service over him in the small log church on the 17th of May, and he was laid to rest in the hillside cemetery on the south slope of the Coteau, beside two of his Wisconsin sawyers who had passed in the diphtheria sickness of 1875. Anna was a widow at 23 years of age, with a son not yet 8 months old, and a quarter section of timber claim ground that the federal land office at Watertown would not transfer to her name without the production of 3 years' continuous proof of cultivation. The Dugnad work ring of the Synod women came to her aid in the first months. They brought her flour and salt pork and split firewood, and they helped her mother with the laundry on washing days. The Sandalen family took her in at the home claim through the autumn of 1879, and Anna spent her hours mending and spinning and watching her son grow. In the late summer of 1879, there came riding up the trace from Brookings a young Hauge Lutheran circuit rider named Bjørn Storhaug, 29 years of age, fair-haired and grave-eyed, who had been preaching the intermission revival across the Norwegian settlements of the southern Coteau for 2 seasons. Bjørn had known Olav Sølvberg in the Wisconsin pinery years before, and he came to call on the Sandalen family with a message of remembrance, a Hauge Psalter, and a small linen bundle of dried Saskatoon berries from the Brookings parish women. He stayed 3 days at the Sandalen claim, and he sat with Anna on the bench under the south eave and spoke of grief and of grace and of the long road forward in the intermission tradition. Before he rode south again to Brookings, he asked Anna's father for permission to call on her again in the autumn, and Knud Sandalen, who had himself been raised in the Hauge faction in the old country, gave his consent. Bjørn rode up the trace from Brookings 4 times that autumn, and on the 17th of October, 1879, Anna and Bjørn were married in a small ceremony at the Brookings Hauge meeting house by Bjørn's elder brother and fellow circuit rider, Pastor Sigurd Storhaug. The Sandalen family attended, and 3 of the Hauge Synod brethren stood as witnesses. Anna and Halvor moved south with Bjørn to a small claim of 40 acres he had taken 2 miles east of Brookings, where he kept a winter cabin and a small library of Hauge devotional books in his late mother's pine-board chest. The news of the marriage reached Pastor Nygaard at the Hayti log church within 10 days. Pastor Nygaard, holding the strict line of the Norwegian Synod against what the Synod Council had labeled the Hauge irregularity, called a meeting of the parish elders on the 11th of November, 1879. The Synod Council voted 6-2 to set Anna Sandalen Sølvberg Storhaug aside from communion and to formally cut her off from the Dugnad work ring of the Synod women. Pastor Nygaard sent a written notice of the ban to the Sandalen, claim by hand of the parish deacon, and the notice was read aloud at the Hayti log church on the 2nd Sunday of Advent. The Sandalen family was permitted to remain in fellowship, but Anna was named in the ban by full given and married name, and her son Halvor was excluded from the parish baptismal roll until such time as the marriage should be set aside. Anna received the news without weeping. She wrote a single letter back to Pastor Nygaard in her careful Norwegian schoolhand, asking him to commend her soul to the same Christ he commended his own, and she folded the letter into the deacon's hand and asked him to ride home in peace. She did not write again to the Hayti parish, and she did not return to the Synod log church. The winter of 1879 to 1880 passed quietly at Brookings. Bjørn rode the intermission circuit through January and February, and Anna kept the small cabin and tended Halvor and the milking goat. They were warmer that winter than they had been the winter before. Bjørn taught Anna the Hauge devotional pattern, and she read aloud from Hans Nielsen Hauge's writings in the long evenings. In the second week of March 1880, Bjørn took the Chicago and Northwestern train south from Brookings to Sioux Falls to attend a regional convention of the Hauge Synod. On the return passage, on the morning of the 17th of March, the locomotive ran off the rails on a frost-heaved trestle 2 miles north of Egan Station, and Bjørn Storhaug was lost in the wreckage along with 11 other passengers. Anna received the news that evening from the station master at Brookings, who rode out to the cabin himself with the conductor's pocket testament that had been found on Bjørn's person. Anna was twice a widow at 24 years of age. She wrote to her parents that night by lamplight, and her father came down from Hayti the next morning by spring wagon and helped her settle Bjørn's affairs at Brookings. The Hauge Synod paid for Bjørn's burial in the Brookings Parish Cemetery, but they could offer Anna no further support, for the Synod's own treasury was strained by the panic year's drought losses across the southern Coteau. In the spring of 1880, Anna returned with her son Halvor to the high ground above the Coteau in Hamlin County, where she still held the timber claim title to Olav's quarter section. The Sandalen family received her without question, and her father offered her the use of the small frame cabin Olav had built. But Anna would not return to the Dugnad ring of the Hayti parish, for the ban had not been lifted. She filed her own pre-emption claim on a fresh quarter section adjoining Olav's old claim on the 18th of April, 1880, under the Timber Culture Act expansion, and she set herself to the task of building a cabin of her own that would carry her and her son through the coming winter on the strength of her own hands. She rode to the railhead at Watertown on the 3rd of May, 1880, and there she sought out a master builder of the Cordwood masonry tradition, a Wisconsin Norwegian-Swedish lumber camp right, by the name of Eskil Vretland, 64 years of age, who had built more than 30 stack-walled cabins through the pineries of northern Wisconsin and the Mesabi country. Eskil had retired from the lumber camps the year before and had taken a small claim on the lower Coteau above the railhead. Anna paid him in advance with the proceeds of the sale of Bjørn's library of Hauge devotional books, and she brought him to the timber claim by ox team on the 11th of May, 1880. Eskil walked the ground with Anna and her father for a full afternoon. He measured the slope and the prevailing winds, and he sounded the soil with an iron rod, and he chose a south-facing flat on a low bench above the seasonal slough, with a fine stand of tamarack 200 yards to the north. He laid out a footprint of 14 feet by 18 feet, with the long axis east and west, and the door set on the south wall to catch the low winter sun. He calculated the wood she would require for the walls. The reckoning came to 8,400 individual cordwood pieces, each one 16 inches in length and 4 to 6 inches in face diameter, all of well-seasoned tamarack. Anna and her father, with the help of 3 of the Sandalen neighbors from the Hauge meeting at Brookings, who had ridden up at Bjørn's brother's request, began the cutting in the second week of June 1880. They worked through the long summer days, 2 crosscuts and 1 bow saw, running from before sunrise to past dusk. They felled tamarack on the north slope and bucked the trunks into 16-inch rounds, and they hauled the rounds by stone boat to the building site. They worked through July and into August, and by the first week of August, the cordwood pile was 20 feet long and 7 feet high beside the laid-out footprint of the cabin. Eskil Vretland began the foundation on the 15th of August, 1880. He laid a course of fieldstone, gathered from the Coteau itself, in 2 parallel lines along the cabin's perimeter, set in tamped sandstone gravel and finished with lime mortar of the long-burned variety. The foundation course stood 12 inches above grade, level along its top, and the inner lime mortar bed was screeded smooth with a hardwood straight edge to receive the first course of cordwood. Upon this foundation, Eskil began the stack wall pattern that very afternoon. He laid the cordwood rounds butt out, end grain showing on both the inside and outside faces of the wall, with the round bodies bedded in a lime and river sand mortar mixed by Anna in the 2-bushel trough, at a ratio of 1 part long-burned lime to 3 parts washed sand to a 10th part horsehair binder, slaked overnight before each day's work. The wall thickness was 18 inches, the same as the length of the cordwood rounds, with a hollow channel 3 inches wide running through the center of the wall, packed continuously with dry sawdust mixed with quicklime as an inner layer of insulation. Eskil reckoned the finished wall at an effective insulation value of roughly 22 on the British thermal scale of his Wisconsin trade, against a value of 9 for the conventional log construction of the Hamlin County frame cabins, and he marked the figure in chalk on the south wall plate when the work was finished, for Anna to keep. Eskil taught Anna the pattern of the stack wall as he laid it. He showed her how to butter the lime mortar onto the stone foundation in a thick bed, and how to set each cordwood round into the bed with a small twist so that the mortar gripped the bark and the round set firm. He showed her how to fill the spaces between the rounds with mortar carefully, leaving no voids, and how to scrape the joint clean with a wooden trowel before the lime set. He showed her how to align the long axis of the round perpendicular to the wall face so that the heat flow path through the wood would run with the grain and not across it. He showed her how to break the courses staggered so that no vertical mortar joint ran more than 2 courses high for the structural strength of the wall. Anna learned the work in 3 days, and from the 18th of August onward, she laid stack wall alongside Eskil from sunrise to sunset, 6 days of the week, with the Sabbath kept clear for rest in the Hauge fashion. The cordwood mason worked the south wall while she worked the north, and the helpers from Brookings, Sigurd Loken and Tor Vinje and Per Brevik, mixed mortar in the 2-bushel trough and ran cordwood rounds from the pile to the wall. The walls rose at a steady pace of 14 inches a day, set on each course, allowed to harden overnight, and continued the following morning. By the 22nd of September, 1880, the 4 walls stood 8 feet high to the wall plate. Eskil set the wall plate of squared tamarack timber, 10 inches by 10 inches, on the top of the cordwood with a final bedding course of mortar, and he pinned it through into the stack wall with iron drift pins forged at the Watertown smithy. Above the plate, he raised a collar-tied roof of tamarack rafters at a steep pitch of 45 degrees, sheathed in 1x6 pine planks, finished with 2 layers of tarred felt paper, and capped with 12 inches of laid-up sod cut fresh from the prairie. He cut 2 windows into the south wall, each one 18 inches by 24 inches, double glazed with sash glass salvaged from a Chicago and Northwestern dining car that had been wrecked on the Big Sioux Trestle the year before. He cut a single small window on the west wall, 12 inches square, single glazed. The door was set in the south wall, 4 feet wide of 2-inch oak, hung on iron strap hinges, and it was lined on the inside face with a layer of cured woolen blanket nailed flat for an inner draft seal. The interior of the cabin was finished with riven oak boards over the cordwood inner face, set on furring strips with a half-inch still air gap behind. The floor was laid in 2-inch tamarack plank over sleeper logs, with a packed layer of dry oat straw beneath. A cast-iron buck stove of the small farmhouse pattern, ordered by mail from the Watertown agent of the Buck Stove Company of St. Louis, was set against the north wall of the cabin on a hearth pad of fieldstone and lime mortar, with a 6-inch stovepipe run straight up through the roof in a galvanized thimble. The stovepipe carried 5 pressed tin disc baffles inside its run, hand-cut by Anna herself from saved tobacco tin scrap, set at intervals to recover flue heat back into the cabin air. By the 7th of October, 1880, the cabin stood complete. Anna paid Eskil Vretland his final wage on that morning, and the master Cordwood mason rode south to his own claim above the railhead with a sealed letter of recommendation in Anna's careful Norwegian school hand. The Sandalen family came up that afternoon to bless the cabin in the Hauge fashion, and Knud Sandalen read aloud from Psalm 91 on the threshold, while Liv Sandalen pinned a small linen sampler of Anna's grandmother's needlework above the doorframe. Anna laid in her winter provisions through the second week of October, 1880. She had cut and stacked 8 cords of tamarack along the north wall of the cabin under a sloping shake roof. She had 60 pounds of dried Saskatoon berries in cured leather sacks, 12 pounds of loaf sugar in a tin caddy, 40 pounds of cornmeal in a copper-bound oak barrel, 28 pounds of cured pickled pork in a brine cask, and a small store of salt, lard, dried beans, and tea. Solveig the milking goat was housed in a small lean-to against the east wall of the cabin, sharing body heat through the cordwood. 9 hens roosted on a perch in the same lean-to. A dry milk cow named Halvdan, kept for emergency provisioning, was housed in a separate sod-roofed lean-to 10 yards north of the cabin. The first hard storm of the long winter came down upon the Coteau on the 15th and 16th of October, 1880. It was a violent, early blizzard out of the north-northwest, with snowfall of more than 30 inches measured at the Watertown railhead. The storm buried the half-cut wheat fields of the southern Coteau under 3 feet of drift before the harvest crews could gather the windrows, and across Hamlin and Codington counties, the wheat was lost beneath the snow. Anna and Halvor sat by the warm buck stove through both nights of the storm, reading by lamplight from the Hauge Psalter Bjørn had left her, and the cordwood walls held the cabin at 64 degrees Fahrenheit at the floor and 71 at the rafters, with only 2 cords of firewood burned through the entire 48 hours. The blizzards came every 3 to 7 days through the rest of October and through November and December. The Chicago and Northwestern and the Dakota Central Railroads halted scheduled service to the southern Coteau by the second week of November, and through the first week of December, the railhead at Watertown received only 1 work train a fortnight, breaking through the deep cuts with double crews of section men shoveling and rotary plows brought west from the Minnesota Division. Coal supplies in the prairie towns ran out by the first week of January 1881. Settlers along the Coteau began to burn fence rails and broken furniture, and on the lower claims the families twisted hay into hard knots for fuel and burned hay twists in their kitchen stoves through the long blue-gray afternoons. The thermometer on the Sandalen home claim, set in a north-shaded shelter on the porch, read -38 degrees Fahrenheit on the morning of the 3rd of January, and held below -20 for the better part of 2 weeks. Stores at the railhead ran short of flour, salt, and lamp oil by the middle of January, and the Prairie newspapers carried weekly columns of the names of settlers found frozen in their own dooryards or upon the open trails between claim and town. Anna and Halvor sat through the long winter alone in the stack-walled cabin on the high terrace. Anna fed the buck stove every 6 hours through the daylight and banked the fire with a layer of fine ash and one large tamarack round at the top of each evening, keeping a slow red core through the long sub-zero nights. The banked fire required only a single split round at sunrise to bring the firebox back to working temperature, and on the coldest mornings the floor of the cabin still measured 58 degrees by the small mercury thermometer Anna kept in a wall pocket above the stove. The cordwood walls and the tin-baffled stovepipe held the cabin warm through every storm, and the inside face of the cordwood at the north wall was always dry to the hand, even when the outside face was caked in 3 inches of frost rime. She rationed the cornmeal and the cured pork, and she taught Halvor his alphabet from the Hauge Psalter, and his numbers from the careful tally she kept of the cordwood, remaining in the lean-to and the firewood pile against the north wall. She kept a small day-book of bound foolscap, in which she recorded each morning the temperature at the porch, the temperature at the cabin floor, the depth of the snow drift against the south wall. The cordwood burned the previous day, and the rations remaining of cornmeal, pork, and Saskatoon. The daybook entries for the long winter survive today in the archive of the Hamlin County Historical Society. By the 1st of February 1881, the Saskatoon stores were near gone, and the cured pork was at 12 pounds. On the 14th of February, 1881, Anna took the dry cow Halvdan out of the sod-roofed lean-to in the deep cold of late afternoon and led her gently for the meat. She rendered the tallow in the buck stove kettle and salt-cured the quarters in the cold cellar she had dug under the cabin floor through the autumn. The fresh meat carried her and her son through the rest of February and into March, with Sølvberg the milking goat still giving a quart of milk a day from the dried lucerne hay Anna had stocked in the loft. The blizzards eased in the 2nd week of March, and through the rest of March and into April there came lulls between storms long enough for Anna to dig out the door and beat a path to the firewood pile under the lean-to. The snow on the south side of the cabin was drifted to the eaves, and the snow on the north side was banked nearly to the chimney top. By the 1st week of April, 1881, the day temperatures rose above the freezing line for the first time in 6 months, and by the 3rd week of April, the great melt began in earnest along the Coteau. The Dakota Central reopened to Watertown on the 2nd of May, 1881, the first through train having broken the cut at Lake Compeska after 18 days of double-crewed shoveling. The mail came up the trace to Hayti for the first time in 7 months on the 5th of May. Among the parish news that the deacon read from the steps of the Hayti log church on the 2nd Sunday in May was the report that 3 Norwegian Synod families along the South Coteau had lost children to the typhoid sickness following the spring breakup, and that the parish manse roof at Hayti had partially collapsed under the snow load of the deep winter, and that Pastor Nygaard himself was confined to bed by the rheumatism brought on by the cold months in the unheated study of the manse. On the 14th of May, 1881, Pastor Jørgen Nygaard rode the 14 miles east from Hayti to Anna's claim on the high terrace in a borrowed spring wagon driven by his deacon. He arrived in the late morning, and Anna, who had seen the wagon coming from a mile out across the breaking prairie, waited at the threshold of the stack-walled cabin in her gray wool wrap coat with Halvor at her side, the boy now nearly 3 years old and well grown. The morning sun was bright across the wet prairie, and the new grass was just rising on the south slopes of the Coteau, and the swollen sloughs were running heavy with the snowmelt of 7 months. Pastor Nygaard climbed down from the wagon slowly, leaning on the deacon's arm, for the rheumatism of the deep winter had not left him. He removed his black felt hat, and he stood at the threshold without crossing it. He had grown thin through the long winter, and his straw-pale hair had turned the color of bleached pine. His Sunday black coat hung loose on his shoulders, and his boots were caked to the ankle in the prairie mud of the spring breakup. He spoke in careful Norwegian that he had heard the rumor of the cabin that had held against the long winter when the synod's own manse roof had not, and that he wished to ask Anna to share the Cordwood method with the synod's building committee, who proposed to rebuild the manse in the autumn. Anna heard him out without speaking. When he had finished, she answered in the same careful Norwegian, slow and clear, that he might miss no word of it. She would teach the synod the stack wall method, she said, on one condition. The ban was to be formally lifted from her name and from the name of her son Halvor, and Halvor was to be entered on the Hayti baptismal roll on the next Sabbath that the parish met. Pastor Nygaard met her eyes, and after a long silence he bowed his head and gave his word in the presence of the deacon and of the boy. He removed a small silver chapel cross from beneath his collar and laid it upon the threshold stone between them as a token of his pledge, and he asked Anna's forgiveness in the name of the synod for the 18 months of the ban. Anna lifted the cross from the threshold stone and gave it back into his hand, and she said in a quiet voice that the forgiving was the synod's own work, and not hers to grant or to withhold, and she invited him into the cabin out of the prairie sun for a cup of hot tea before the long ride back to Hayti. The ban was formally lifted on the 4th Sunday after Trinity, the 12th of June, 1881, by a unanimous vote of the Synod Council in the small log church at Hayti. Olav Sølvberg was entered on the baptismal roll on the same day. Anna did not return to the Norwegian Synod Fellowship, but she taught the Cordwood masonry method to the Synod's building committee through the summer and autumn of 1881, and the new manse roof at Hayti was raised in the stack wall pattern in October. By the autumn of 1885, 47 Cordwood cabins across Hamlin and Codington counties carried Anna Sandalen Bjørn Storhaug's stack wall pattern. The pattern spread through the southern Coteau and into the Big Sioux country in the latter 1880s, and Eskil Vretland's name and Anna's name were spoken together in the building trade through 3 counties. By 1893, 4 synod parishes and 7 Hauge meetings on the eastern Dakota plain had adopted the stack wall method for their parsonages and meeting houses. The Cordwood cabins of the southern Coteau held through the cold waves of January 1888, January 1893, and February 1899 with no structural loss, and Anna's day book of the long winter was copied by clerks across 3 counties. Anna remarried in October 1888, this time to Jens Aberg, a Hauge Synod farmer of Codington County, and they had 2 more children together, a daughter named Liv and a son named Knud. Halvor Sølvberg Storhaug grew to manhood on the Coteau, and he became a Hauge Synod minister himself, ordained in 1903 at Brookings. Anna Sandalen Sølvberg Storhaug Aber passed peacefully on the morning of the 11th of January, 1947, at the age of 91, in the same stack-walled cabin on the high terrace above the Coteau. She had outlived 2 husbands, 3 children, and 1 century. The cabin was donated by her grandchildren to the Hamlin County Historical Society in 1989, and it was carefully restored in 2014 by her great-granddaughter Margaret Sølvberg of Sioux Falls. The original tamarack cordwood walls, the iron drift-pinned wall plate, the tin-baffled stovepipe, and the threshold stone where Pastor Nygaard had laid down his chapel cross, all stand today as they stood in the autumn of 1880. Visitors may walk through the cabin between the months of May and October, and on the wall above the buck stove there hangs a small linen sampler of Anna's grandmother's needlework, carried west across the Atlantic in the spring of 1873, that reads in Old Country Norwegian, "Lord, hold thou my hand through the long winter,